Welcome to the 8th episode of What's Next Beyond Service. These past 8 weeks have really flown by. I'm really glad to be here doing this, and I want to thank Sarah Carell again for extending me this opportunity. And I also want to welcome Sarah back today. She's been gone for 2 weeks. One of her sons got married, and that's a tremendous thing in his and his new wife's life, obviously, but certainly for parents. And just want to welcome you back, Sarah, and I hope you had a great 2 weeks off. I know you were very busy, probably pulling your hair out and all that stuff, but hey, welcome back.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Yeah, it's good
Absolutely.
To be back. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and then the other thing I want to do real quick before we introduce our guest and get into the interview is I just want to take a moment and reflect on what happened a week ago today. We lost 13 service members in Afghanistan, Marines, a sailor, and a soldier. And it's important to remember what folks that serve bring to our country, that at any moment when they're deployed in a combat zone or even, here at home when they're training, things happen and people lose their lives. And they give that very last measure of being a service member and what that means when they give their life. And it was a tragic event. Last week was a really tough week for a lot of people, especially for the family members of these folks that passed. So please take time, and I'm sure most folks that will be listening to this probably have, but today, please take some time and think about those folks and say a prayer for them, and God bless their eternal souls. Okay, well, now I want to shift gears and introduce our guest for episode 8. I call this episode Coffee and Candor, one, because I know my guest loves coffee. I love coffee, and I know there's going to be candor because this guy is a retired sergeant major. He's not retired in the sense that, he's not doing anything, but he's a retired Marine sergeant major. And this is going to be a great show because I know he's going to tell us what he's thinking. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and welcome Charles Wells to our show. Charles, welcome aboard. And for those that don't know Charles, which probably isn't most, but for those that don't, if you can just give us a quick introduction to you, and then we'll start the interview. So welcome, Charles.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. I appreciate you and Sarah having me on today. I was a Marine some would say I'm still a Marine because once a Marine, always a Marine. But I served 26 years on active duty. I recently retired. Actually, a year ago this month was my official end of active service. So, September is a special time for us for a couple of reasons. But, hey, I don't know if people have always accused me of having a great deal of candor. I don't know if it was the military that taught me that, or if it was actually the way I was raised. Because if you ever meet especially my mother, she has candor to a fault. She's the lady that has no filter. And I think maybe that's where I got it from. I'm not sure if that was a gift that the Corps gifted me in particular. But, throughout my service, particularly as a sergeant major, I often had commanders and staff members that would chuckle at some of the things I said in public because it was, often things that they wanted to say, but they simply could not do it. So, yeah, it's always interesting to see people's reactions when you give them the unvarnished truth about something. And I have found that a lot of people appreciate that. Some don't, but, people that don't appreciate candor are, people that I don't want to do business with. So, in this age of heightened sensitivity and, the woke culture that we're in, I'm all about respecting, other people, but I believe you can respect people and tell the truth. And that's kind of, that's what I value. So I guess that's where my candor comes from.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said in terms of what we should be doing when we talk with people, right? We should be respectful, certainly, but you should never be worried about speaking your mind. And the folks that you're speaking to should understand that, right? They should be glad that you're willing to speak the truth and give them your opinion. I know my time in the Marine Corps, I was an officer, and I was absolutely blessed to have senior enlisted folks that were, either my chiefs or my sergeant majors, and I valued their advice. And the candor part, you've got to have that, because sometimes you're not on track and you need somebody to say, hey, what about this? Or do you really want to do that? Oh, geez, you know what? You're right. I didn't think about that. But with that candor, there's a lot of humor too, because like you said, sometimes a sergeant major can say it and it's a lot different and it has better impact than if it came from, the battalion commander or the regimental commander or whatever. And there's so much humor in that too. I won't tell you the story that I'm thinking about, because, it was, it was a master guns that worked for me, when I was a major. And that guy, he had no problem telling you what he was thinking about. He's one of the smartest guys in the room, really, absolutely was. But his humor was interesting, and sometimes he would say things, and it's like you're just kind of looking around to see who's in the room. You're just waiting for someone to lose their mind. But anyhow, okay. Well, hey Charlie, what I want to do, something that I do in the beginning of interviews with folks, is I want to give them a little bit of time to talk about their military background. Obviously you're a Marine and you've got incredible stories to tell, but just as a nexus to kind of, blend with the audience, or, have that sense of connection, that thread with folks. I'd like you just to talk a bit about your background in the Marine Corps, anything that, you want to talk about specifically. And then from there, we'll, get into the meat of the interview. So what can you tell us?
Well, I kind of grew up in a little bit different side of the Marine Corps. I grew up in maintenance. So, the Marine Corps has people have a certain preconception about the Marine Corps that, the old recruiting poster, the Marines are looking for a few good men. We often don't think about, women in the Marine Corps. Well, part of the blessing of growing up in maintenance is that we had a ton of women in maintenance. So I didn't just grow up with big brothers. I grew up with big sisters. So from a very early age as a Marine, I didn't really see the side of the Marine Corps that didn't have women. And, females in uniform were just service members. So,
right.
That's kind of the way I grew up with them, because, we just had tons of folks, of both sexes in maintenance. And it was a little bit more normal of an experience than a lot of Marines of that time frame grew up with. So I was blessed in that regard. Being in maintenance taught me a great deal about maintenance management, which has actually served me very well as a civilian, because maintenance management, much like quality assurance, I'm in quality assurance now, it's the same no matter what industry you're in. Now, certainly each industry has specifics that you have to understand. But if you understand maintenance management, if you understand supply chain management, you're going to understand it outside of the military, just like you understood it inside of the military. So that was, a very valuable learning lesson for me to grow up in that part of the Marine Corps. I actually did my first deployment for OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, while I was in maintenance. And if you recall, that's back when the war lasted for 4 months and then the mission was accomplished.
Right.
So that was my first deployment, was with a maintenance unit. Later on down the line, I decided that I wanted to be a first sergeant. And in the Marine Corps, when you're at E7, you have to make a decision. For those out there that don't know, you have to choose to either become a first sergeant or a master sergeant. Master sergeants stay in their primary job. First sergeants go to the command level and they become a senior enlisted advisor to commanders at varying levels, depending on how much time you have. I decided to become a first sergeant because I didn't want to be locked into my job for the rest of my career. I wanted to be able to mentor and lead folks and not have to focus on the job aspect as well. Because master sergeants are very much mentors and leaders, but they also have to juggle that with actually worrying about, a job every day. So, not that first sergeants don't work, but I'll stop right there. You understand. So,
No, absolutely understand. That's where coffee comes into play.
right. So the problem with being a first sergeant in the Marine Corps is that it's very, very competitive for promotion. And a lot of people told me that I would never make it. They said, you'll never be a first sergeant, because I had never been to what the Marine Corps calls a B billet, basically a special duty, drill instructor, recruiter, Marine security guard. I'm missing one. Anyway, I'll circle back, but I never did one of those special duties. So, those make you even more highly qualified for promotion. So people told me, yeah, you'll never make it. Well, instead of, adopting that defeatist attitude, I decided that if I couldn't stand out in that particular area, then I would have to stand out in a lot of other areas. So I did a lot of other things in my career, up until I was an E7, and I won't get into all of them, but I tried to stand out in a lot of different areas to compensate for the one area that I couldn't stand out in. And, turns out the Marine Corps recognized that, and I got selected to first sergeant. Now, you got to be careful what you ask for in the Marine Corps, because sometimes they'll give you exactly what you ask for. And in my, I wrote a letter to the promotion board that year, and I told them Fallujah was currently in full swing and it was getting really bad. And we had just a record number of first sergeants retire, in the year or so during and after Fallujah, because they had, they were tapped out operationally speaking. So I wrote a letter to the board and I said, if you see fit to promote me to the rank of first sergeant, I desire to serve wherever you need a strong first sergeant. Well, the Marine Corps must have seen that letter, and that Marine Corps karma came around, because when I got my orders, they were sending me to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. And that doesn't have any particular significance unless you realize that 3-4 was the most combat deployed infantry battalion in the Marine Corps in OIF and OEF. So,
right.
So they sent me to that battalion. And, my very first battalion formation with them that I stood in, we gave out 13 Purple Hearts. We didn't give them out. We awarded them. We awarded 13 Purple Hearts for the previous deployment. And boy, you talk about putting something in perspective for a guy that had no infantry experience previously. So for the next 4 years, I served with the Marines of 3-4, and we did Iraq and Afghanistan. We did Afghanistan pretty early. We were actually over there for the Marja operation. We were not part of the Marja operation, but we were over there during that time frame. We had part of 3 provinces. We had Farah, Bakwa, and Nimrose province. And, fortunately, we had such a strong battalion commander and such a strong operations officer that we actually, we lost 2 Marines. We had a few, wounded over there, quite a few, but I'll tell you, it would have been so much worse had it not been for the commander that we had, because he trained us so hard leading up to Afghanistan that when the battalion went, they were prepared in every way. So, sometimes as a commander, you don't realize exactly how much of an influence you have on people. But I tell you right now, and I'll call his name out, even though I've not asked him about it, but, Martin Wetterauer, absolutely the strongest commander I ever served with. And had it not been for that guy, we would have lost a lot more Marines. So, yeah, great experience in the infantry. But
well, Charles, if I could, Charles, I know I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry, but what you said, I think is very important. As a commander, I know, a prior commander, I know how important there's a triad, right? It's the commander is the operations. Sorry, I had a call. I'm on my phone, so I don't know whether you heard that. I had to dismiss the call there. But getting back to what I was saying, there's a triad there. You have to have those 3 folks be a strong part of the team, because everything's about operations. Everything, all these other things, operations is the hub, because everything goes through operations. It's got to be
Sure.
that way. But having a commander and a sergeant major, those two folks, that connection there with that OPSO, that's a strong team. And everything in my mind goes from that triad. So yeah, and thank God that you had a good commander. But you know what? I guarantee he'd say the same thing about you. So anyhow, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, that's valuable. I have found that in life, you can either be an expert in one thing and truly be at the front of your field, or you could be really, really great in a lot of things. Now, you can't be an expert in all things, but you can be great in all things. So in the Marine Corps, as a Marine, I always tried to be great in all things. I couldn't be an expert in one, particularly after I became a first sergeant. So I had to be great everywhere. So unlike the Army, when you're a Marine and you go the first sergeant route and then the sergeant major route, number one, you're always what the Army calls a CSM. You're always at the command level as a sergeant major, but you don't just stay in the units that have your job field. You go to any unit in the Marine Corps that needs a first sergeant or a sergeant major. And I actually enjoyed that because every unit I went to, it forced me to learn a completely different job, because if you really want to be effective in that position as a Marine, you have to kind of know what your Marines do, right? You don't have to be an expert in it. You have to be familiar. So I decided that I would try to go to every single unit in the Marine Corps that I had no idea what they did. So I grew up in maintenance. I never wanted to be a first sergeant in maintenance. I wanted to go everywhere except maintenance. So when I became a sergeant major, it was no different. So as a sergeant major, I went to a couple of different helicopter squadrons, had a blast. Absolutely my favorite time in the Marine Corps. I also went to the comm school out in 29 Palms, which is the biggest entry-level school in the Marine Corps. They produce a gob, different job fields. I think at any one given time, we had between 2,500 and 4,000, privates and PFC. So that definitely represented its, very unique challenge. And then my last job in the Marine Corps, I served as the senior enlisted guy at Marine Corps Base Hawaii. And, it was there, true to form, the Marine Corps threw me something completely different as well, because there I worked with a ton of civilians. I worked with a lot of, state and local leaders. You were always given a brief to somebody. You were always interacting with somebody's, congressional staff delegation, the local leaders here. I'll tell you, surprisingly, we saw Senator Hirono a lot. One of Hawaii's two senators. She was pretty engaged with the Marine base. And of course, she's from Kailua, right over there by the Marine base as well. So we saw her a great deal. She was actually a great supporter of the Marine base over there, and got a lot of projects pushed through for us during my time there anyway. So it was a really interesting challenge, because it's something that as a Marine, you're not really, prepared for. So you kind of have to learn on the fly how to deal with folks like that. And that was actually a really great job for me to have at the end of my career, because it prepared me very, very well for transition, where now all I deal with or interact with is, civilians. So it really helped to kind of file some of those, burrs off of my rough edges and make me a little bit more flexible in the outside. So that's me in a not so small nutshell.
No, that's perfect. The last part of what you were saying there, your last job as a Marine, I was thinking the exact same thing in terms of what that meant for you as you would transition from the military, into your civilian capacity, because all those things, you start to see that, hey, there are folks out there that aren't Marines, right? And this is where I'm going. I mean, I might not be going exactly here, but I need to be able to communicate with folks so that they can understand me. And as a Marine, we have our own language, just like all services do. But you have to start thinking, okay, I have to speak in a way that they're going to understand, my intent and what I'm saying. And just that interface helps you to start in your mind, transitioning to that person that you're going to need to become when you leave the military. We take the best, and hopefully we put aside the not so good, and we make our way into transition. So yeah, that was a great place to be, leaving the military. That's awesome. God was looking out for you.
That's right.
As he obviously, it's pretty obvious to me that he has, through your time, because we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation, I'm quite sure. So what I want to do now, Charlie, is I want to talk about my connection with you, which is through LinkedIn. Now, thinking back, it's probably, I guess we've been connected for a year and a half, 2 years. But I do recall the first time I saw you, it was on a video on LinkedIn, and you were in your garage, and, you were talking about things that absolutely caught my attention as someone who served in the military. And I saw it as being organic. It was original. It was like, hey, who is this guy? Who's this Charles Wells guy? And then you're also cutting videos from your office. You're wearing your uniform, you're a sergeant major. And it's like, wow, this guy is doing something different. And what you were talking about was meaningful. It made sense. It was something that I was thinking, wow, when I was on active duty, this would have been good to have somebody like you that was doing it back then that could have helped me kind of get my head straight on what transition was going to be. I transitioned in 2012, and I guess I got onto LinkedIn in 2012, a few months before I got out of the military. Didn't know really anything about LinkedIn, and didn't really start using LinkedIn till, years later, effectively, I would say. But you understood something about LinkedIn, and you started building your platform. You started having a following, and then you went on to things like Sergeant Major's Coffee, your 44th episode. I just saw that here, and it was that one, as we talked in pregame, that really resonated with me. The message that you had there, about, how you treat people, and it is up to you and how you treat people as best you can to live peaceably with all. And I think that was one of your best, even though it was not very long. I think it was so well focused, and how you tied that into your background and how you do things now. That's very powerful. And that's one of the things I like about you, because you're able to make things understandable. I know you've heard this before, but Napoleon, when he'd have an op order, he wanted it to be understood. So he would have a corporal brought in, and he would have the corporal, they would present the op order to him. And if he understood it, that meant that it was a doggone good op order, right? And so you have the way of presenting yourself in a way that is absolutely relatable and is understandable. And there's always a valuable, meaningful lesson tied into what you're doing, whether it's specific on something to do with, maintaining something or maintaining relationships. You're out there, you're helping people, and you're doing well. You're very successful. People will know it when they see it. So I want to talk about what got you into LinkedIn and on the path that you're on now. What was that? What brought you to LinkedIn?
Sure. Well, somebody told me a long time ago, Scott, they said, if you go through transition classes, go through them twice. So I did. I went through transition classes twice, and, the first time was great, and they told us about LinkedIn. So I thought, well, let me get on LinkedIn early and just see what it's all about. I got on LinkedIn, and almost probably one of the first 20 guys I connected with was a guy named Herb Thompson. And, if you've been on LinkedIn any amount of times, you've either seen a post from Herb, you've chatted with Herb, you've, connected with him. And once I connected with Herb, one of the next guys I connected with was a guy named Matt Quick. So these two are both giants in military transition. And, they just offered me so much perspective, and it was so great to talk to those two guys. And unbeknownst to me, actually, Matt was going through transition the same time I was. And as I'm talking to the guy, I'm thinking, oh, he must have transitioned, 5-10 years ago. This guy's an expert in it. And I think he was probably sharing a lot of lessons learned real time as he was learning them. But I'll tell you, he is a really, really astute guy, just really sharp. And, Matt's like everybody's big brother. I mean, Matt is probably one of the more positive people I know on LinkedIn. And it was just, it was a really good, first couple of connections to make to get my feet wet in LinkedIn. I connected with a few other guys who created a lot of content, and that showed me the power of content creation. One was a guy named Alex B. Sheridan, who I still comment on almost daily. And another one was a guy named Jonathan Palmer. And both of those guys, they're always giving away free how-to tips on LinkedIn. So, I just watched them and I took what I liked and, what I didn't like, I just left alone. And, the final guy, I guess, was a guy named Patrick McNamara, who I started watching. And if you've ever seen one of Patrick's basic dude stuff videos, they're about 30 seconds long. They're literally shot with him holding his cell phone in his hand and just walking around the yard. Absolutely the most low quality, videos, but they're so impactful. So I realized early on that if I was going to be a creator, I wanted to be, in the vein of, Patrick McNamara and not so much Alex Sheridan or Jonathan Palmer, because they use a lot of really high tech, stuff. They use a lot of really advanced, editing software and techniques to do what they do. And what they do is amazing, but that's just not something I want to put that much time and effort into. So what Pat taught me was that, hey, you can create great content and not spend a ton of time, because the trick is the message. So,
absolutely,
his brand screams in his videos. Just basic dude stuff. It's right there in the hashtag. So he does a really good job at that. And that's kind of what I try to keep my messages simple like that and to the point. Sometimes that comes through, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, I'm a little more successful with it than others. So you always kind of have to keep an eye on your own brand and your own message and make sure that you're not straying from it. But that's how I got into content creation. And, from the very beginning, early on, a guy told me, he said, Charlie, you need to figure out what you want to do. And I said, well, that's easy. I want to work in transition. I want to help people transition. And he said something that struck me as kind of condescending at the time. He said, well, first, how about you transition and figure out what it means to transition? Then you start thinking about transitioning. And the way that he said it, I took a little bit of exception to, because I realized I was not going to be an expert in transition overnight. Listen, I'm not a Mensa member, but I was the honor grad of my 6th grade class, in Corbin, Kentucky. So I'm not the dumbest one in the room either. But I took a little bit of exception to that. And it irritated me a little bit, because at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a transition expert. Transition changes every year in the military. It really does. Now, there are experts out there that can tell you all about how to get hired into a civilian job. You can't confuse those people with transition experts.
Right.
There are a lot of great, HR folks that I listen to on here, like Ben White. Man, that guy's a genius. And there are tons of other Ben Whites out there. But in transition experts, you can work in transition, with the military or with a nonprofit, or you can work in HR. But at the end of the day, how many of us are really, transition experts? I think the guy that is in transition is a transition expert. So my initial LinkedIn content was all about transition, but at the end of the day, I knew I was never going to make money in transition, and that's not what I wanted to do for a living, but I did want to do it for life. So I do want to help, transition and service members. As long as I can. I'm just never going to make any money in it. So transition is almost like my unpaid side hustle now. And, I have a full-time job. I'm a quality assurance rep for the Navy. I help folks out in privatized housing. Let me just wrap it up nicely like that. I do everything from inspecting houses to talking to residents. I do, a little bit of data analysis on, housing, budget stuff, you name it. But I also am starting a side hustle, which you'll see on LinkedIn as well. I'm going to start inspecting homes here on Oahu. My company is called Main Effort Inspections. You can find me on Instagram, Main Effort Inspections. That's my new love is,
Right.
inspecting homes. And it's because I love taking care of people. And I think the Marine Corps did give me that. I love taking care of people and I love taking care of families. And what better way to do that than to inspect a home that they're about to make a 30-year investment in? So
No,
whether
absolutely. And,
Yeah.
Charles, I get that, everything that you just said. And I do want to talk about, main effort here in a bit, but I want to kind of circle back to what we were talking about with, content and creating content, whether it's on LinkedIn or wherever you do it. Yes, there are absolutely guys out there that are very flashy in their production. But you are absolutely right. It's the message. If you don't have a message, all the cool stuff that you're flashing up on the screen, I mean, that might initially attract you to the video. But once you start watching it, if there's not a message there, you're probably not going to go back to that person.
Right.
But with, and you clearly get that. You articulate messages very well. And, I know as well from doing videos is it takes a lot of time to get the right message out. Sometimes it comes within one or two takes and you got to be really happy when that happens. Other times there are numerous takes because like right now, my dog is sitting outside of the door and I'm the one home right now and she's whining and scratching at the door. I didn't let her in because she'd be bugging me as well. So hopefully you can't hear that. But those things happen when you're cutting a video. The phone rings or whatever, or you say something stupid. A lot goes in behind the scenes to that 2-minute or 30-second video. And the content that you provide is I think it's very sharp. I think it's very well tailored. And I can tell that you care about what you do. That absolutely comes across. Now, the transition piece, that's huge for me. I like helping folks and I'm into the transition piece. And yeah, it doesn't, it's not going to pay the bills. And we understand that, right? But the fact that you're turning around and reaching your hand back to folks to help them up and to help them through transition is a big deal because transition is different for everybody. And transition, there's a lot of things in transition. It's not just finding that next job. It's who are you now as a person, right? It's connecting with purpose again. Some folks have a really tough time. They struggle with that purpose piece. You have a purpose when you're a Marine or a sailor. But when you get out, you need to find that purpose. And maybe you can transfer some of that purpose into just the things that you do daily because, you're regimented as a Marine. But yeah, transition, there's so much about that. And again, I'm thankful that there are people that are out there like you that understand what transition is. You've learned things and you're turning around and you're telling folks, you're giving them stories that, they can quickly listen to, understand, and then maybe apply it in what they're doing as they transition. So that's a big deal. And, the other thing with your videos that I like is you do those bloopers. Occasionally you'll put those out there and those are hilarious. And, I think that also keeps folks coming back because in addition to what you're talking about, they're probably wondering, hey, when is Charlie going to have some of those bloopers that he does? The variety is the spice of life. What made you think about doing the bloopers? Just because when you're doing video creation, there's so many takes, I guess you just realize, hey, this could be content too.
Yeah, I did. I was talking to a friend, a connection on LinkedIn, and he said, I really want to create content, but he said, I'm afraid to do it. And I said, what do you mean afraid? And he said, well, I mess up a lot. And he said, I mess up when I'm talking and I'm just not very articulate. So I told him, man, everybody messes up. I said, you don't have to worry about that. He said, nah, you don't mess up. I see your videos and how smooth it is. And I thought, I'll show you. I'll put some bloopers on here, and you can see exactly how it is. And that's what I started doing, and that's why I went to the blooper reel, and it was it was a big success because everybody wants to see the bloopers because they see. I think sometimes people believe that the bloopers are made up, but in fact, I mean they're 100% accurate. That's actually what's going on in the background sometimes. And yeah, it's important for people to see those bloopers because it's not easy. Like now walking around with a camera on on Zoom, some of these things are they're unscripted, and sometimes the dog is outside whining. Sometimes a knucklehead drives by with a loud muffler while you're trying to do one of these, and it just, hey, it happens. So embrace it, embrace real life, because we get enough make believe fake stuff on network TV. If I interact with somebody and I'm making a personal connection, I want to see them. I want to make a personal connection with them, and not the them that they want me to see. I want to see the real them. And that's the beauty of LinkedIn, is you do get to see a lot of, real things from real people. Unlike Instagram, I have a teenager who gets on Instagram a lot, and all of her pictures are all glamour shots and shot from angles that are attractive and all of that. But that's not what she looks like all the time. That's what she looks like some of the time. LinkedIn, you see people for the good and the bad, I think, and that's the beauty of of bloopers and of just being. I think the word authentic, when you talk about LinkedIn, is starting to be a bit overused, but it's overused for a reason, because it's valuable.
It is, and I think you're spot on with. Over time, you can tell who's being real and who's not, who's just about production, and who's really talking from their heart and attempting to be value added on here. Some folks are selling things, and hey, that's okay. And there's a way to do it. But what I had mentioned earlier, what got me connected with you was that the value that you brought as being original, that organic feel that, hey, this guy's onto something. And for me, I don't necessarily like the flashy stuff. I mean, it's cool to see what people can do, with content creation, and as they put their videos together, that end state, the end result, how it looks. But I absolutely am about the message and about understanding what the person's trying to convey. And it gets you thinking. And that's what the messaging is about. You want folks to think about what you're saying. And yours is always helpful. It's always considerate. It's always trying to improve people. You've learned things, you become a better person. And so you're turning around and you're sharing your wisdom, and it's a gift. And that's the way I see it. I'm thankful that we're connected, because I absolutely get value from the things that you do. And it helps me when I'm doing, my videos. Because sometimes I'll think about how you do things or how you approach a topic. And it's always good to have a little bit of something to go from. You can do everything yourself, so to speak. And you may or may not be successful, but if you're smart, you're going to look out there, like you talked about. You talked about who are the folks that were out there doing what they do when you started LinkedIn, and you learn from them. So we should always be learning and growing, and that's what you do so well. The instruction, the teaching, the life stories, that they're also meaningful. So, transition wise, Charlie, is there anything, any one or two things that, when you think about transition, that really resonated with you, that were important, that you want to share with folks?
We say it on LinkedIn all the time, but network. At the end of the day, it's really about who you know. And some people, take that to imply cronyism or nepotism, and that's not the case. If you don't know somebody in an organization, it's really hard to get a lot of info about that organization or to understand what it is they do or how the culture is. It's really important for you to know folks, not just to get your foot in the door, but to understand what door you're walking into once you get inside. So, there's people use the word networking so much on LinkedIn that it has also become trite. But I'll tell you, it's the most important step to transition. Heck, it's the most important step, even if you're not in the military and you're just looking for a new job, a new career, a new place to live. My wife and I, we were talking about moving to a place in the US where we don't have a lot of connections, but we'd always wanted to live there. And we were talking about, hey, would that be a good move? So the first thing that she did is she got on Facebook, and there's a couple of Facebook, because there is a military base there. So she got on a couple of Facebook posts or Facebook community groups of people who live there. And she started watching what they were saying and, what they were complaining about, what they were praising. And then she just started, asking them some direct questions and told them, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we're thinking about. What would you recommend? And, we got so many great comments from folks about the area. And, in an environment like that, it's usually the complainers that speak up. So the fact that we heard almost no complaints, really went a long way with us. But that's just a perfect example of networking. And, that's what the digital age has done for us, is it's opened up these opportunities to network with people that you're thousands of miles away from. And, with a simple Zoom call or a phone call or a DM, I mean, it's like you're right next door to one another. So that's what networking does. So for somebody that's transitioning out of the military, there's no excuse for you to get out and not know at least 10 people in the area that you're moving to, at least. And you should definitely know at least one person in the company that you're applying for. So network, Scott. If you don't do enough networking when you get out, you're going to find yourself, on the struggle bus for a little while. And I'll tell you, I know too many people like that, because Marines are probably the worst networkers ever. I used to pride myself as a Marine for how much I reached out to sister services or even, sister units. I would reach out to as many folks as I could, because number one, it shows that you have a great deal of flexibility in your approach to problems, but it also shows that you're not afraid to reach out for help, which says a great deal about your humility. And I think the reputation that the Marine Corps has is we don't play well with other services. I don't know if it's deserved or not, but that's sometimes the reputation. So when I moved here to Oahu as a senior enlisted for Marine Corps Base Hawaii, I made sure that I went to every single base around this island and talked to the senior enlisted folks there. And I found that whenever I would show up, they always had a look of shock on their face, like I was, walking in with a pink tutu and, tap shoes or something. And the question I got most often,
visual.
The question that I got most often was, "What are you doing here?" And I would laugh and I'd say, "What do you mean? What am I doing here?" They said, "You're a Marine. Marines never show up to any of the joint service meetings we have." So, it was nice to be able to change it up a little bit. And we definitely built a lot of, inroads with folks by doing that. But it's networking, because, those other services, they were so willing to help one another out when they needed it. And once we came on board, they were willing to help us out when we needed it. So, it was a common thing to see, Air Force aircraft, working with Marines in different areas, and Navy aircraft supporting Marines in different areas. And it was because of that relationship we built. So, relationships can't be undersold. You can't underestimate the value of a relationship. And the biggest mistake that you can make is to neglect that area when you're transitioning. Too many service members say, I'll figure it out once I retire.
Yeah, it's too late then.
Yeah, that's the wrong answer.
Yeah, Charlie, I agree. It is about relationships. Everything really is about relationships. You have to know that, and you have to be proactive in building those relationships and then maintaining them over time. And that's one thing that's so great about LinkedIn compared to any other platform, any other social media platform, is because it does enable you to connect with people, to have dialogue, to get to know people. It's a fantastic tool, and anyone that's not using LinkedIn for that, you're missing out. And
Sure.
when the pandemic hit, boy, I think a lot of folks got on LinkedIn during that time. I don't have any stats to prove that, but I'm pretty sure it happened because everyone was at home and social media probably took an uptake. And my followers, my connections grew during that period because there were more people using it. But it enables success, that ability to find folks that are in the enterprise or in the arena that you might want to go into job wise. Hey, who are those people? Find out what they do, connect with them, and talk. That's the value and the great part about LinkedIn. And the other thing you talked about is getting off your duff and walking around. The Marine Corps, we call that leadership by walking around. I had a colonel that was Liebois, and I was a young first lieutenant, and I was like, Liebois, sir, what is that? And that's leadership by walking around. And he did. He would show up in all kinds of places when you would least expect it. Like at the motor pool at 5:40 in the morning, he's rolling up underneath a vehicle and asking questions of the lance corporal who's turning wrenches. And he actually knew what he was talking about. He had a really varied background. He was a good guy. But anyhow, so now let's see here. It's about, we've been talking for about 45 minutes. So I want to transition here, no pun intended, I guess, but I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because I noticed that you have, and you mentioned it, this thing called main effort inspections. I want you to tell us a little bit about that. I know where you're going with that, and I think it's awesome. Who wouldn't want a Marine, especially a sergeant major, inspecting, the home they're about to buy? I mean, give me a break. That's and that is so important. If you're buying a home without inspection, don't. I lived off base my entire career, and we bought every place we went. And I learned the first time, gee whiz, why didn't we, pay a little bit more money and have someone do this? And I won't get into that, but yes, that is cool. So tell us about what you're doing with main effort.
Yeah. So, I inspect, I think just this year alone, I've probably inspected about 700 houses for the Navy. That's a large part of my day. And when you inspect a home for the Navy or for the military in general, it's not a lot different than inspecting a home, off base. There are a few things that, that I look at on base that I wouldn't necessarily look at off base, and vice versa. And the relationship's different because, if I find a problem in a Navy home, I can go directly to the maintenance team and say, hey, I need you to fix this today. Home inspection in the civilian world doesn't work like that. You're just there to point out, things that could use some attention. But, like I said earlier, it's all about taking care of families. And, whether it's military or whether it's otherwise, you get to take a family in a lot of cases. This is the biggest, it's the biggest investment they'll ever make. And what you want to do is you want to be able to get them into that home and realize, hey, what are some things in the home that you need to pay attention to? There's a misconception out there that if you get a home inspection and the inspector finds a problem with the home, that you shouldn't buy the home. That's not true, because every home has issues, right? There's no such thing as a perfect home. Even a home that is brand new is not perfect because, sometimes the contractor, he'll use, a different type of product, or, maybe there was a small oversight in the construction of it. So most of the problems that a home inspector will find for you are not major problems. There's another misconception that every problem the home inspector tells you about is a serious, huge problem. Like the house is sinking into the ground and it's about to break in half. that is simply not the case. A home inspector's job is to just give you really good perspective on the home that you're buying, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, home inspectors aren't appraisers. A home inspector doesn't tell you what the home's worth or whether you're getting a good deal. That's not a home inspector's place. A home inspector's place is to tell you, what he or she has found in the home, what some of the issues are, what some maintenance concerns might be in the future. So that really helps set a family up to understand the investment that they're about to make, so that there's no surprises when they get into the house. So yeah, that's really, why I was interested in going into it. As you alluded to, with getting a sergeant major to inspect your house, I really love that it takes a lot of attention to detail to be an inspector. You really have to look high and low for things. And it's like inspecting Marines in uniform. Once you understand how to inspect a Marine in his uniform, top to bottom, left to right, well, that's kind of how you inspect a house. You inspect, you might be inspecting a home on Sycamore Street today and a home on Elm Street tomorrow, but you're going to inspect both homes the exact same way. And that varies by inspector. But for me, I like to look at the roof first, whether I get on the roof or whether I use my drone to look at the roof. I'll do that first. Then you do
You're high
the
speed
walk
there
around.
with that drone, huh?
Yeah. Well,
That's cool.
I chuckled. I asked one of my good friends about it, who's also in the industry here. I said, early on, I said, hey, how much do you use a drone? And he said, well, if it's a 2-story house, he said, I'll use a drone. He said, if it's a 1-story house, I'll get up on it with my ladder. And I said, well, why the difference? And he said, Charlie, where would you rather fall off of, a 2-story roof or a 1-story roof? So, both of us are in our mid 40s. We're both, gray beards. So I said, yeah, that's a pretty good point. I said, let me look into one of those drones. So when you fly a drone commercially, you actually have to get an FAA certification. So I actually had to go through that process. And
yeah, I think you even mentioned that on a post that
Yep.
you were approved. And what a great tool of the trade. That's smart.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely smart thinking and execution.
Yeah. It's really all about, you have to be cautious when you go into a side hustle, because a lot of services and products out there have been commoditized. For example, you have Walmart, Target, and Kmart. Now, if you think about those 3 stores, and I know Kmart's no more, but if you think about those 3 stores, Target has a very specific brand and a very specific, what you're going to experience in a Target, and what you're going to experience in a Walmart. Those two are almost polar opposites. The only thing similar is that they're both big box stores. Kmart's problem was they kind of blended into both of those big box stores. And when you don't differentiate yourself from the competition, you're going to have a hard time succeeding in your field. So, a great way to differentiate yourself in the home inspection industry is to, offer things like ancillary services. Do you do mold inspections? Can you inspect my pool while you're here? Can you inspect for termites while you're here? Can you inspect, and there are so many things out there you can look for. Radon, air quality. Can you do those things? Do you use an infrared camera when you inspect so that you can see moisture and, you can see where insulation's missing? Do you use a drone? So those things really help, to set you aside from a service that, if you're not careful, you can commoditize yourself by just looking like everyone else. So technology is important, and understanding how to use that technology to your advantage is, even more so.
Right. Yeah. You're being distinctive and you're setting yourself apart from the others. And, when you're looking to buy a home, as you said, that's an investment. I mean, that's one of the biggest investments you're going to make in your life is your home. And it's good to know what you're getting into because, as you said, yeah, there may be some things that are going on with the home, but it doesn't mean it's a bad buy. It just informs you on, hey, these are the things that I found. And, then you spend a little bit of time figuring out, well, what's that going to cost me? Or then you have some things to bargain with the person you're buying from. So it allows, as a point of departure for making that right decision, whatever that decision winds up being. And so, yeah, that's the value that's added and kind of the, insurance or safety valve check. That's an inspection. That's so important. So yeah, what's cool about that for you is it's right up your alley, right? I mean, you're doing something that you're passionate about and you're turning it into a side hustle, as you said, that's helping other people. And it's also enabling you too, by putting money in your back pocket. So that's just a win all around. That's good stuff. Well,
Right.
Charlie, I'm looking at my watch here and we're at 11:55 and we have 7 folks that are still hanging on here. So what I want to do real quick, if you're good with this, is I want to ask Sarah. Sarah, if you could do me a favor, if you can look and see, do we have anyone that's asked a question? And if not, is there someone who wants to ask a question of Charlie? So if you can check that out.
Does anybody, if you raise your hand, or just unmute, I'll be able to tell from my end. Oh, there we go. Janet has a question.
It's a question and a comment. I'm not military. I'm retired from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a dispatcher, and my husband was a police officer with them. But the transition, my husband, something happened at work, and like I'm sure some people, ordered to do something that he didn't feel comfortable with. And when he took responsible for it and enacted it, they said, you know what, maybe you shouldn't do that. So anyhow, he left angry after 28 years. And I think that disillusionment and stuff is something that people need to look at with the transition. And I'm sure you've come across that too, right? He would have gone forever. He'd absolutely loved his job. It was politics and management. And but what I've found that with lots of people, you have to go back to your roots. Like, what was your passion before you got into it? And like Scott said, take what you've learned in your military years or your career years, get rid of the rest and go back to that and go back to what your passion was and use your knowledge. And so he's gone into photography again, which was his passion when I first met him. But it's that looking back that you have to refocus, and just wondering about your comments on that.
And well, first of all, wow, that was great. You know, you hit on two things that, you know, the first is don't leave bitter. And that right there, you know, I know so many folks in the military that they say, I'm going to do 30 years. Okay, that's fine. Well, those folks should probably do 25 years. You know, it's individual dependent, but you get a guy or gal that does 25 years and they're so focused on 30 that they overlook the fact that they're miserable and they hate their job. So by the time 30 rolls around, they hate it and they leave bitter. And yes, absolutely great comment. Don't leave bitter. Leave when you're on top. You know, I tell them like this, you know, Michael Jordan, when he was with the Bulls, he was probably the best basketball player to ever, you know, pick up a basketball. Michael Jordan retired, but then he came back and played again. And, you know, he left in relative obscurity because he wasn't that good when he came back as he got older, because he got older, you know, and he was number 23 with the Bulls and he was number 45 toward the end of his career. And I tell everybody, leave when you're still number 23. Don't wait until you're number 45. So that's perfect. You know, your comment on going back to what you love, I echo those same things. And I think that is so valuable. You know, when I found my current job, people start with a what instead of a why when they're transitioning out of anything. They say, hey, I think I want to be a project manager or an airline pilot or a nurse. Okay, well, that's a what. Why do you want to be those things? And instead of focusing on an occupation, figure out why you want to be that occupation. And, you know, for me, I love working with people. I love working with processes. I love getting out. I hate being chained to a desk. I want a job where I can get out, walk around, see people, talk to people. I love meeting people. I love customer service. So I had to find a job that checked some of those boxes. And you know what? In my current role in military housing, boy, that checks all of those boxes because you get to do all of those things on a daily basis. And that's how I know this is my second and last career, because I love it so much. So, man, I'll tell you, that is, you know, both of those points are just so impactful because, you know, don't leave bitter. And by all means, figure out what it is that you're passionate about and find a job that checks all of those boxes. And you know what? It'll never seem like you worked a day in your life if you do something that you love. So, man, just absolutely great input. And hey, I'm a big Canada fan, because let me tell you, the best fishing I've ever done is in Canada. So, you know, when you mentioned that, boy, you had me. We were right there immediately.
Hey, that was fantastic from both you guys. You know, what a great question, and the fact that you were able to phrase it the way you did. Charlie hopped right on that, and great message again, Charles. That's the bitterness part. That's a tough one, right? Because bitterness eats at your heart, it eats at your soul, it weighs on your shoulders, and it compresses your spine. I mean, really, it does. You have to learn that you need to get rid of the bitterness. You have to learn that there's a element of forgiveness, even if you might not feel like you want to forgive, if that's what part of the issue is. But coming to terms with that bitterness, taking that deep breath, and moving on from the bitterness opens up such a different world for people. You don't want to carry that on your shoulder. I mean, it took me time to learn that. I learned it over time, and I try my best to think about that, about not being bitter and why I shouldn't be bitter. And like we talked about earlier, Charles, about how you treat people, all those things are so well connected. And it's important to remember those things. So what a great response, Charles. I appreciate that. Is there anyone else out there, Sarah? Can you give us another check? Looks like Eric.
Eric, yeah. Eric has his hand up.
Hey, my name is Eric Norval. I'm currently going through my transition journey from the Army. My question is for Scott and Charlie. You guys talked about candor earlier in the video, and I was just wondering, what are some examples of candor that you've seen in leaders like post-military or outside the military, and how is that kind of different?
Well, I'll let Charlie go first, but I do want to say your beard's rocking for some guy who's just starting transition. So,
He's
Charlie,
going to be
what do you
successful.
think?
You can definitely
right.
tell how successful a guy's going to be in transition by the man makeup that he has on his mug. Yeah. Because that's what a beard is. It's makeup for dudes. Let me think. Candor. I'll tell you, outside of church, it is hard to find a guy that will give you unvarnished candor and not be concerned with what you think. I have had a lot of mentors inside the church who I really valued for that. It seems like a lot of folks that you deal with in business are afraid to give you complete candor because they're afraid to offend you or hurt your feelings. Now, there is a guy that I work with, and I really have to offer this guy up with an asterisk because he's actually a retired senior chief in the Navy. So is he really a civilian? But he and I have that relationship, that bond of service. So he has been very much a mentor to me at my current, my current job. And he's pushed me and encouraged me in a lot of areas. I know I can always expect complete candor from him. I could say that with a couple more of my coworkers as well, but they're also, affiliated with the Navy. One was a sailor for about 8 years, and the other one's married to a sailor. So I don't know that I've met somebody unaffiliated with the military who practices complete candor. Now, that doesn't mean they're out there. I've just not had that experience with them. They'll tell you the truth, but they preface it. So, I mentioned this morning to the retired senior chief. I said, the funny thing about the civilian world is you can absolutely criticize somebody's performance, but you need to wrap it in at least 6 layers of love before, they get to the morsel of criticism in the middle of all that love. And it's really about, I think you have to be a little bit more empathetic in the civilian world. You have to understand where that person's coming from, but you also have to understand just exactly how sensitive they are. And, some people, it doesn't need to be 6 layers of love. Some people, it only needs to be 2 layers of love. But, it's kind of like if your wife comes to you and says, "Hey, does this dress make me look fat?" Is that an appropriate time for candor? I mean, that's obviously a little bit of hyperbole, but hey, if your wife comes and says, "Hey, does this make me look fat, or does this look bad on me?" You're never going to say, "Yes, that looks terrible on you." You're going to say, "No, I like that color, babe. No, it's everything makes you look beautiful. You are absolutely gorgeous in anything you wear. You go out in a potato sack." You're going to say that. So, all of my Marine buddies, first of all, I know never to ask them if something makes me look fat. And I don't even have to ask them, because I know the second I start looking like I put on a half a pound, they're going to say, "Bro, why are you getting fat?" So, I mean, I appreciate that candor from them because we grow up with that. When you move into the civilian world, there are just certain things you just know you can't talk about because they're just a lot more sensitive sometimes. Does that mean it's bad? No, it does not. I mean, if you think about it, you could have candor with fellow servicemen and servicewomen because you had a common bond. Now, likewise, we have a very tight-knit group where I work. I could be more honest and upfront with my coworkers than I could, somebody that works in the section next to us. My coworkers know me and they know how much I care about them. So when I tell them something, they know I'm not trying to be hurtful or offensive. If I tell them something, that's maybe a little bit critical, they'll take it for what it's worth and they'll say, hey, I appreciate it. Likewise, I would do the same with them. So it's all about, what kind of relationship will you have with people, and that'll definitely tell you, how much candor you can use with those folks, I suppose, and how many layers of love you need to wrap around it.
Wow, that's spot on, Charles. I love the way you say things too, man. It's like, hey, Eric, for me, I'll give you two examples that are, relatively recent examples for me, and it's through my connection with, paying for a service. The first one, there's a guy named Arnie who was a logistician. He wasn't in the military, but he was a logistician for many years. And then at some point, the company he worked for got bought out and they wanted to move him, and he was enjoying where he lived out here in California. And he had a lifelong passion to start a company where he was building things. And what he does is he does landscaping, he does hardscape. So, he's putting in pavers, he's building, vertically columns. This guy is masterful at what he does, and he's hired a really good crew. And Arnie is a straight shooter. As I talked to him about what I was looking to do, he gave me options. He told me what he thought about some of the things I wanted to do. And at first I was like, okay, well, it's my money. But, his candor made me realize, geez, yeah, I don't want to spend my money on that. I want to spend it on this. And, he could have sold me a load of goods and just did whatever I was willing to pay him to do. But that's not how he operates. He does have that candor, and he tells you what he thinks. And him and I have become friends. He's a good man. I trust him. And that's something that, at least for me, the trust thing, you trust the Marine and sailor on your left and right. When you walk out that gate of the military for the last time, be careful about the trust quotient, right? Because you can't just give your trust to anybody. It has to be earned. And you got to be careful of that. I got burned on the trust thing early in my transition. So I learned a lesson with that. So that's, be careful about that. It doesn't mean that there aren't trustworthy people. It just means that not everyone on the outside has the same background and that same connection that you have with your shipmates or, the guys and gals that you work with in the military. Now, the second person I want to talk about is a guy who is a service manager at the local Honda dealership here. My daughter bought a brand new car and, had an accident, and it went there. And there's issues right now, as we know, with distribution and logistics because of COVID. Things are crazy. Things are back ordered, and her car was there for 2 months. But I tell you what, Russ was on top of this the entire time. He gives a damn. He's just another good person. You don't get the slimy feeling that you might get sometimes when you go to a dealership, when you're talking to someone in sales, or you get kind of the runaround by the folks that are working in the service department. That guy understands customer service. He lives it, and he's a good person. He tells you exactly what he thinks, and I trust him. I could tell by the, because heck, I've been working with this guy now for a little over 2 months, and it's finally all resolving. But he became a trusted partner in our relationship because of his candor and because of who he is as a person. And sometimes we just, shoot the bull talking. We get done with the business and then, we start talking about family or about things that we've been doing. And I can tell just by the way he communicates that he's a good guy. And so he's earned my trust. And hey, if I need something, I know that I can turn to him because of the relationship that we built. So yeah, having the ability to discern from folks that are, that are telling you something and, is it true? And being able to receive the candor too, that's another huge part. It's one thing for someone to have candor, but it's also another thing for you to have your catcher's mitt on there and to not get wrapped around the axle about what they're saying. Because, if it's true, hey, the truth is the truth and you'll know it when you hear it. So be willing to receive that message and put it into your portfolio, right? Make that change and just be thankful that that person was willing to tell you what they thought, because you don't want a bunch of yes men hanging around. I think we've probably seen where that leads here recently, right? So great question. That was a really good question.
Yeah.
Carol, what you got? Or Sarah, rather.
This was fun, Charlie. This is really great to hear you share. It's very inspiring. I do appreciate your candor also, because I always feel like, like Scott was saying too, we can build trust with somebody who is honest, who's a straight shooter, who cares. And that takes having a bond. And I liked what you said about bitterness, just bringing that up. So I'm not a service member or veteran. I now have a son who's in, but before that, have not been connected. But I connect the dots with all the stories that I hear. And really having a place, I would think during transition at the beginning, if it was a tough one where, you step back, now it's quiet, and all the things bubble up that you've maybe suppressed, and just like having that time where people realize, okay, this might be the time, not just trauma, but bitterness and grief. There's a lot of grief, a lot of grieving there that a lot of times people don't talk about. And so these are the things that really can keep people stuck. So I love that you brought that up. And yeah, and the trust thing too. Yeah, I know that's hard. And that is a big one, just to be careful. But then when you can find those people that you can build that with, that really are honest, and you look at their actions, not their words. I've learned that lesson too. Look at their actions. And when things are congruent, then you know what, you've got a gold mine there that you can build trust with and you can build things with. So I really love this. I have people in my mind that I want to send these videos to. So I'm so glad, Scott, that you brought Charlie on, and really enjoyed it today. Thank you.
Yeah, amen to that. I'm glad he was available. Charlie is one of those guys that I had on my list, and I kind of have a method to my madness with who I'm inviting when you're making the schedule. And I also wanted to get at some level of proficiency before I brought Charles on too, right? So, there's a method to your madness when you do things. I also want to thank folks for taking part in the show here too. So Lynette, Janet, Eric, and there's one or two others that have already departed, but thank you for your time today. Obviously you see value in what Charlie's doing, so it was worth your time to come on today. Lynette, do you have anything you want to ask, or anyone else before we wrap things up here? Okay. Well, hey, Charles, we're right at about an hour and 15, so we'll go ahead and finish up here. I want to offer you, you have any parting words of wisdom for us, or anything else that you want to share before we say goodbye here?
I just really appreciate you and Sarah doing this today and having me on. I appreciate you guys speaking directly, to the community that we minister to a great deal. And listen, there are a lot of people out there, that need help through transition. They don't know what they don't know. So to those folks, I would encourage them to find a big brother and a big sister on LinkedIn and just kind of partner up with them. And listen, if you ever want to reach out and talk to me, hey, I'm always just a DM or a phone call away. So Hey, I love helping transition and service members, so don't be shy.
Hey, you guys heard him. Don't be shy. And if there's anyone that you can connect with here on LinkedIn that is somebody who's an honest broker, someone who has great life experience and they're not afraid to share it with you, Charlie Wells is that man. I feel blessed that we're connected and that he spent time today to come on and share more of who he is and provide more nuggets of wisdom for folks. Transition isn't just military transition. There's transition in life. We move from different jobs. We have loss in life that puts you into a different type of transition. So my hope is that what we talk about here certainly helps folks that are in the military or folks that are first responders, but it also helps people who are in transition, whatever that might look like, because there's a baseline and things we're talking about. It's very relatable. So Charles, again, thank you so much for your time. We're going to end this session. If you could just hang around for a couple of minutes, if you have time, just to
Sure.
chat here after we stop the recording, that would be appreciated. Cool. Well, thank you again, Charles. Carol, thank you. Welcome back again. And next week, I've got Jeffrey Knight. He is a retired Army officer. Don't hold that against him. He's still a good guy. He'll be on, and we're going to talk about what he did in the military and then his road to transition. He had some bumps that he is going to talk to us about and how he overcame those and all the good things that he's doing now. He's got a couple of side things going on too that are meaningful, and you've probably seen him here on LinkedIn. So, okay, guys, thanks again. Thanks for everyone coming and taking part today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Charlie, if I move again, it would be so worth flying you out to have you inspect our home.
So
I
where
would
are you?
totally trust you.
Now, are you also in California?
Yeah, I'm like right smack center of San Diego. I'm like
Okay.
right in the middle. Yeah.